So scroll saw, parts on this, we've got the table. And make sure on both saws you keep your board flat on the table. You can cut round stock. Just make sure that you're keeping it as flat on the table as you possibly can. Don't try to lift it up while you're cutting. Parts of this table, like I said, back here, this is the blade tightener. If it's up, it means the blade's loose. If it's down, the blade is tight and it'll hold. Right here in the top, we've got the chuck, and in the bottom we've got the other chuck that holds the blade, and then the blade is this little piece of metal right here. Most of the time, the blades, especially in that yellow scroll saw, the blades that are on there will probably break before they would actually hurt you, because they're so small. I mean, it's the size of like a tiny pencil lead, and so they're pretty weak. They've got teeth. The teeth have to be pointed down. So on both saws, the teeth have to be pointed down. You don't really have to worry about it on the bandsaw, but on the scroll saw, you might have to change the blade or adjust it or take it partially off, and I'll show you that in just a second. But you might have to change it. Teeth point down. If the teeth point up, it makes your board bounce up because it's trying to cut on the way up. If it's down, it'll still try to lift up a little bit, but not nearly as much as if the teeth are trying to pull it up. So you want the blade teeth pointing down on hardwood and softwood. I know that's a question on the test, so make sure you know. Make sure when you come over here, your board's got lines on it. Once again, I came unprepared today. Make sure you've got lines drawn on your boards before you come over here. Know what you're going to cut. This saw cuts internal curves and it cuts external curves. So this right here, I can cut that. That's an external curve. This right here is an internal curve because I want to keep everything, but I want to get rid of that circle right there. And so you do that on the scroll saw. I'll show you that in just a minute too.
So would you have to drill a hole if it were a solid
If it was a
board?
regular solid piece of wood, you'd have to drill a hole. I grabbed this purposely because I didn't feel like drilling a hole today. Feed your work slowly into the blade. You don't want to go too fast; it'll break the blade. I guarantee you that. And every time my blade breaks on my saw, and I cut all the time with the scroll saw, every time the blade breaks, it still surprises me. So, if the blade breaks on you, it'll probably surprise you a little bit, and it happens from time to time. We'll just replace it. It's not a big deal. Now, if you're coming up and you're breaking them repeatedly because you're being
Stupid?
not smart, I'll say, then there's a problem. If the blade breaks because whatever you're trying to do and it's a couple times, it's one thing. If you're cutting, when you're cutting on here, try to do the straight parts first. It's easier to cut the straight first than the curve. Both saws. Somebody asked if you got to drill a hole. If you're doing something internal, make sure you drill the hole first. Make sure the blade's tight. Okay? When you change the blade, lift this up, you push this down, get the blade out, don't turn this. Okay? If you turn this, it's going to make it so that the next person has to make sure it's in the right spot, that it's tight enough. And from my experience, high school students have a hard time judging whether the blade's tight enough. So just don't play with that. This piece right here is for blowing air at the board. It's really helpful when you're trying to cut because it gets the sawdust out of the blade so you can see what you're actually doing. Let's see. When you're cutting an external curve, you cut outside the lines, just like on the bandsaw. If you're cutting an internal curve, sand just inside the lines. Okay, does that make sense? If we cut outside the lines, we can't add that extra material back in. If we cut inside the lines, you can cut and sand stuff off. I've actually had students in the past, they've done portraits with a scroll saw. They took a picture of somebody and we put it into a computer program and it adjusted it so it was black and white and it was very distinct. I had one student that cut out a picture of Taylor Swift that was actually very accurate. It was just a headshot, and they cut it out using the scroll saw and ended up turning out really good. And so that's something that people are using it for. There is a variable speed on here. It says knob right here in the front. Adjust it. Usually I've got it so it's about 3/4 of the way up. That way it's going to be cutting through and it's at a good speed. Keep your hands out of the line of the blade, 2-inch margin of safety. Okay? And I'll demonstrate. And it does make a funny noise. I'm going to keep this part over here, so I'm going to cut on this side. Okay, it's pretty simple.
Brendan,
Yes,
can we have Cameron Kevin to the office, please?
not here.
Thank you.
Yep. Typically, if I'm doing one of my projects, I cut right on the line because mine aren't exactly particular if it's perfect. But chances are, if you're doing something in here, you're going to want it to be as good as possible, so you cut outside the line. Okay? If you're doing an internal cut, let's figure out where I drew that. Okay. If you're doing an internal cut, make sure you pay attention because I'm sure that you'll ask me this later. Push down after you release the blade, and the blade pops out. I didn't want it to, but it did. Put it through the hole on the board. Insert the blade into the bottom guide. Insert it into the top. Tighten this back up, and you're good to cut. Make sure you put this back on. I forgot to put this on. Make sure that's back on. I didn't realize it was off till it fell off. Cut inside the lines, then we can sand extra material off. Any questions on these two?
No, sir.
I'm not going to have you guys demonstrate the scroll saw.